Hey, I'm Thais Kajumbo, and if you're here, it probably means that reading doesn't feel the way that it used to. And it's probably not that you don't like reading or that you don't care, but it is literally harder to stay present with anything these days. This video goes along with the guide, How to Read When the World Feels Unsteady. And I want to talk you through how I read right now in this season of life. You don't need to take notes. I want you to just listen the way that you would if we were sitting together in a cafe over a cup of coffee. I look back through books and history to help us think more clearly about what we're facing right now. So if you're someone who wants that depth instead of noise, then you're in the right place. Click the link to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. So let's talk this thing through. First, why does reading feel so different now? I think we have to be honest about what we're up against. Our phones have us captive. And I don't mean to take this lightly, but it reminds me of the pirate in that Tom Hanks movie who says, "I'm the captain now." That's how these phones have us hemmed up. They have become the captain. They have taken over our lives. We're reaching for them without thinking. A lot of times, these phones are our alarm clocks. So, not only are we shutting off the alarm, but the first thing that we do is look at the phones. The last thing we do, oftentimes, is we look at our phones. So, we're getting this blue light all the time. We're getting these distractions all the time. We end up scrolling without noticing how much time is passing. And we're outsourcing our attention minute by minute. And now we're doing something similar with our thinking. We've got AI, we've got chat, we've got Claude, we've got all these other tools that summarize things for us. And the algorithms are deciding what it is that we should be paying attention to. So they're telling us, oh, I saw that you looked at shoes. Here, look at all these other things about shoes. Or I saw that you watched this one video of road rage. Now watch all these other videos about road rage. Or I heard you talking about buying a snow shovel. Let me show you ads for snow shovels. And the way the content is written online now, it's designed for us to skim, for us to scan, not to read anything at length. So it's no wonder that we're finding it difficult to sit down with a whole book. I don't think that that necessarily means that there's something wrong with us, but I do definitely think that we are living inside of a system that is designed to keep us distracted. It profits when we're distracted. So, of course, they're going to continue to feed us all these things to keep us scrolling and swiping and spending our coins on things that we really don't need. Now, let's talk about curiosity versus obligation. One of the biggest shifts that I made was paying attention to why I'm actually reading something. So, curiosity feels different in your mind and in your body than obligation does. So obligation comes with a lot of tension. So obligation kind of feels like, man, everybody's reading that. I should be reading this too. Or I keep seeing this book all over the place and everybody's saying it's so good. If I don't read it, I'm not going to know what anybody's talking about. But curiosity has a different pull to it. And right now, there's a lot of pressure around reading, especially because it's the beginning of the year. You've got people talking online about how many books they read in a year. They're showing their book stacks. They're showing pictures of all the books that they read all spread out. They're tracking their numbers. And that's all well and good until you remember that many of us are married, we're working full time, we're raising children, we're caring for aging parents, we're managing households, or we're just trying to stay sane. And even if you don't have all of those different things on your plate, I'm pretty sure that your life is still full. And trying to measure reading by volume ignores that reality. So instead, I think that we should choose books by season. And I have done this at different seasons in my life. So my reading has changed as my life has changed. Years ago, when I read The Kite Runner, parts of it were so troubling. I mean, that book is heavy. And I remember having to just pause, really pressing pause on my reading. I would sit in my reading chair, I'd close the book, and I would take some deep breaths. Or I would go and get tissue because I was crying so hard. And sometimes I would just sit quietly and just kind of collect myself from what it was that I read. And I didn't force myself to push through because I knew that forcing myself in that moment would have some kind of cost, some kind of negative cost. And then there are much lighter examples. So I didn't read romance in my 20s because I was not happily single. I very much wanted to be married, and I didn't want anything adding to that emotional weight that I was already feeling. And all those romance books, the girl meets boy or boy meets girl and everything's great. Then they have a little, kerfuffle where they separate and then they come back together. They live happily ever after. That was not my reality, and it did not look like it was coming anytime soon. And I was not trying to, subject myself to anything like that. But since I've been happily married, I love a good rom-com now. And I find that those books can really give me an escape or a break from the heaviness of, real life. And that doesn't make one version of me better than the other. It just means that I was paying attention to what I could actually hold in those seasons. There's another thing that I kind of suffer sometimes with obligation or, um, you know, trying to be realistic about what season I'm in. And there are lots of books, especially that deal with some of the darker past of Black history that sound really, really interesting. This goes for movies too, that sound really interesting and that I could probably learn a lot from. But when the world already feels really heavy, I don't need anything else adding to that heaviness. I want to keep a little bit of levity in my life. And so I encourage you to think about that too. Think about where you really are in life and what can you really handle. Do you need something that's heavy or do you need something that's light? Do you need to read about dragons and fairies or, something else like that? Let's now talk about reading without forcing the focus. So I don't force myself to focus anymore either. If I sit down and my attention is not there, then I'll just read for a shorter amount of time. Maybe I'll just read a page or two or read for 10 or 15 minutes. If something hits really close to home, then I'll pause. And I've learned that pushing through usually leads to resentment of the book or resentment of myself or resentment of my time. It does not give me any more insight about what it is that I'm reading, and I'm not really present in what I'm reading. So I'm kind of just like wasting my time. Pausing, though, makes it easier to come back to what you're reading. And understanding what you're reading also doesn't always show up on a schedule. Sometimes you get a fresh understanding of what you're reading later, when you're having a conversation with someone or you encounter a situation at work or you are watching something else. Sometimes that understanding arrives later, not when you're trying so hard. You don't have to try so hard. You just need to show up and be present. I want to talk about how I interact with the actual page. So sometimes I read a book and I just read it through. Like a lot of my rom-com books, I just read them through. I don't mark them up. But when I'm reading a book that I really want to understand or internalize, I'm underlining what catches my attention. I'm circling words that I don't understand and maybe I need to write down the definitions. I write questions in the margin. Sometimes I use book flags. And this helps me come back to my thought. It helps me to kind of pause in the moment and realize what's there and say, okay, this is something that I want to give some more thought to. So I'm just going to make a note of it and then I'm going to keep going. I'm in these moments when I'm reading, I'm not trying to master the text right then. I'm just noticing what it's making me think, what it's making me feel, overall what it's doing to me. And that's enough. So for example, right now I'm reading The First Ladies and you can see that I've got my flags in here now. When I first started the book, though, I didn't have my flags with me. And in the first chapter, I was just kind of reading it to see what was there. So I didn't write anything in it. So the first couple of pages there's nothing on them. I did come back after the fact and put one of my flags there because I remembered there was something in the first chapter that caught my attention, and it was one of the categories that I'm thinking about. But then at the end of the first chapter, I had questions. So you can see that I wrote in my book here because I wanted to come back and think about those questions. And then when I started in chapter 2, I was ready. I underlined things that I wanted to remember. I put flags in the margins with words on them because the words on my margins are my categories. And then I also put thoughts and questions in the text. So this is helping me to interact with the book and really internalize the book the way that I want to. And like I said before, the meaning doesn't automatically emerge right when I'm doing this. So I'm underlining, I'm circling, I'm making notes, but that doesn't mean that I'm really thinking deeply about it right now. And the other thing about this period that we are in is there's so much pressure right now to extract meaning from everything. I watched a leaf blow, and I thought about there, everybody's looking for a takeaway or a quote or a lesson, and I'm not rushing that. I'm paying attention to what I keep coming back to, what themes I see coming, jumping out at me. And some ideas take time to show their usefulness to your thought process, your usefulness to what it is that you've got going on in life. And reading doesn't have to lead to like an immediate action to matter. Sometimes it's working quietly in the background. Like I said, sometimes it comes up when you're having a conversation. And you're like, oh, that's just like what Mary did in this book that I'm reading, and then you're able to create that meaning after the fact. So you just have to be present in the moment, staying present in where you are and what you're reading. Another thing that I consider is reading across time. So, one of my favorite genres is historical fiction. And I love reading historical fiction because I find that it steadies me in the present. So, when I read about people like Mary McLeod Bethune, I remember that this uncertainty is nothing new. This book takes place in the 1920s and 1930s in the US. So let's consider what that means. That means that Jim Crow is still happening. That means that anti-lynching laws had not passed. This means that it's the Great Depression. It means that there's world wars happening. So there is a lot happening when this book takes place. And yet, so much good still happened. Also, let's also consider that in the 20s was the Harlem Renaissance. So even though there was Jim Crow, even though were limited political rights, Black people were still thinkers, they were actors, they were writers, they were educators, and they lived under far, far more restrictions than we have today. And they still thought, they still built, they still moved with intention. They were still able to build wealth. They were still able to thrive. So having that context really matters. And reading history really reminds us that we get understanding, we get that clarity by looking back with intention, having a clear perspective, and putting things into action. Finally, I want to talk about community. Some of these thoughts are meant to be shared, but not everywhere. Some of the thoughts that you have when you're reading are meant to be shared, but they're not meant to be shared everywhere. A lot of what we see online is performative. You've got people pretending, you've got people pretending all over the place. You've got people who even seem to be pretending to read. If you pay attention to other people on YouTube or Book Talk, they're talking about books that they've read, but it really seems like they maybe just put the book into ChatGPT and said, give me the Cliff's Notes version so I can talk about it. Just because they're aiming for likes and clicks or whatever. But a lot of times what we're thinking and what we're feeling needs a safe space, especially when it comes to reading about historical fiction. And if you're a Black woman and you're listening to this, a lot of times we need space. We need to hold space for each other because we know that not a lot of space is being held for us anywhere else. And it's nice to come into a place where you don't have to explain yourself. What's understood doesn't have to be explained. Are you familiar with that expression? What's understood does not have to be explained. Certain conversations need slower paces and they need trusted people. That's why I created the Reading Lounge. It's a book club and a conversation space for thoughtful, like-minded women who want to talk honestly about what we're reading, what we're navigating, and what we're carrying. It's a space where we can speak freely, where we can look back together, we can think forward together, and wrestle with ideas that don't survive, very well in social media or out in the public. So if this conversation resonated with you, if you're craving this depth of discourse and reflection, instead of just reacting to something, I would love for you to join us. The link is below. Come into the room and come into the conversation. I also want to remind you to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you can get notifications when I'm dropping new videos.